Chinese, and I will translate I will interpret into English. And you should all have the text in your prayer book. Good morning, everyone.
今天呢，我稍微解释一下佛子行上实际上从现在开始。以前呢，我们供修的时候都是那个一直前面念想佛子行上实际颂那从今天开始以后，那个礼拜天供修前面呢，每个礼拜天都会解释一下一个句颂，佛子行上17颂里面。然后呢，那周呢，请大家稍微思考那个部分，稍微练习，然后就有怎么样的怎么讲呢？就结论有什么样的一个困难，在下一个礼拜天来我们讨论以后我们礼拜天供修现在是会做这样的一个。
So starting from today, we would discuss the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas each week. In the past, we recited these 37 practices in the beginning of our practice. However, starting from today, I will go over each verse by verse. And each week, we talked about one verse. And then for the coming week, I would encourage everyone to think about and contemplate, and also to practice what is being written and been discussed for that verse. And if you run into any question, if you have any place that's not clear, then you could bring it up in the following week. So that's what we plan to do.
其实后天就我要去其他地方了，就接下来的那个3个礼拜天我不会在这里，但是还是今天就开始吧，按照我们原来的那个行程，今天就开始讲解前面。那我什么时候回到这里？礼拜天供修的时候就再讲下一部分。
So I will be starting a trip the day after tomorrow, and will be away for 3 weeks. So despite that, I would like to start a discussion and teaching today as we have announced. So whenever I come back on Sundays, then we will continue while we leave off.
这佛子行37颂呢，就很怎么讲呢，就容易听得懂，不需要什么解释的，直接看书就 会听得懂的。但是有的时候还是这样一个一个的解释啊、提醒啊，这样的时候又有的时候就会了解这有一点就是不同的那个怎么讲啊角度的会理解的比较不一样。
Well, the writing in the 37 practice is pretty straightforward, and most people would be able to understand by just reading it, and really does not need additional interpretation or explanation. However, given that we have this opportunity when we go through it, it may offer you different perspective through this explanation. So that is still beneficial for us.
而且呢，我们常常共修前呢，要念那个佛子行37颂的目的的时候，我们就那时候提醒而已吧。真正的目的是我们去做，我们去修佛子行37颂，这个跟那个其他的那个仪轨不一样。其他仪轨的话，按照仪轨的有观想啊，有持咒啊等等的。佛子行37颂不是这样的。佛子行37颂在这里念，然后就是你出去日常生活当中啊，做工作也好，相处那个咒人间要练一练，要修一修，这样的一个。
So the purpose of reading 37 practices of Bodhisattvas every week is mainly to remind us that the real purpose is for us to implement, to practice that on our daily, day-to-day mundane life. And this particular text is quite different from other sadhanas. Usually for when we practice sadhanas, we do visualization, we recite mantras, accumulate mantras. However, with these 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, it is important when we read it, it is important to implement that, practice that in our daily life, and use that as a guideline for how we interact with other people, how we do things. And this is the practice of 37 Bodhisattvas.
开始读佛子行37颂的时候，有南无观世音菩萨，在那个呢original 的一个范围，哪一个藏传佛教的那个经书，从印度翻译成印度文那个范围翻译成那个藏文的，前面都有一句是那个留下原来的那个 original 的文字，这个佛子行37颂也是按照那样的一个规矩来写下来的，它竟然不是那个从印度翻译西藏的，这个是西藏本身的本地的一个大学士写下来的，但是还是那个前面他用放来赞叹观世音菩萨。
So when we, in the beginning of 37 practices, we have this homage to Lokeshvaraya, and this is actually the format that's quite common. It's a common practice in Tibetan Buddhism. Initially, when Buddhism was introduced and translated from Sanskrit, Indian Sanskrit, into Tibetan, and it is a common practice. In the beginning of each sadhana, you preserve the first praise in its original language, in this case Sanskrit. And for these 37 practices of Bodhisattva, it is written by a Tibetan teacher. And even if it's not translated from Sanskrit, he also preserved this tradition of keeping the first praise in Sanskrit.
那从印度翻译的经文呢，为什么要有一句话是原来的那个梵文？它也有原因的。第一呢，怎么讲呢？就是佛教，信佛的那个怎么讲呢？就相信将来的佛，将来出现的佛也会上法的时候还是会用那个的language， 这样的话，我们到现在就要怎么讲呢？要种下一个那个种子，第一个是就这样子的，第二个呢，就要提醒翻译的那些大师的那个怎么讲一个 kindness， 没有他们翻译那些经书，在我们的文字的话，我们也没有办法去了解，看不懂。所以呢，那些翻译的大师也是对我们来讲非常就是那个
尊敬。So why do we leave one verse in Sanskrit? In Buddhism, not only we believe in the past, we also have some understanding and some belief about the future Buddha. And so in many texts we try to make connections with the future Buddha, and by reciting their name we would plant a seed with this connection. So that's one of the reasons why we preserve a prayer in Sanskrit. The second one is that it serves as a reminder that to praise whoever translates the text. We know that, and to recall their kindness. Without their kindness, without their effort in translating the text into what we understand, we will not be able to comprehend the text at all. So in this purpose, we try to remind ourselves the kindness of the translator.
我刚刚有一点开始的时候有一点不重要。第一是因为佛陀有讲传法的时候，这个男的这个传法的，这样我们也就是那个会有特别的加持。第二，你将来的话也会用那个的文字那个 language 的会讲法。现在我们要积累那个缘分。第三呢，我们要尊重那个 translator 这些经文的和我们的那个文字那些的大师们，这个原则。
So let me add something here. There are three reasons. The first one is Sanskrit is the language that Buddha taught all the Buddhism. And so by keeping the Sanskrit, it has a special blessing in that way. Not only that, second reason, the future Buddha would also use Sanskrit or this language to teach when they become enlightened. So we want to start the connection now. The third one is to remind ourselves the kindness of the Bodhisattvas. Those translators help us understand from the original language to a language that we understand now. So there are these three reasons so why we usually keep one verse in Sanskrit.
所以呢，所有的经文从梵文翻成藏文的都有前面那个有的呢那个经典的名字留下那个 Sanskrit， 然后在下面有一个依次的那个障碍，就这样。那么以后注意都是会有这样子的一个。
So usually those scripture that's translated from Sanskrit to Tibetan, whether they keep the first verse, first prayer in Sanskrit, or sometimes even the name of the scripture will be kept in Sanskrit. So you could pay attention to this in the future.
然后接下来有2个句颂不是属于佛自己37颂里面的。那为什么？第一个句颂是赞叹观世音菩萨，然后呢，第2个句颂是那个叫什么？就是那个觉性 commitment， 觉性什么呢？就他要去写下这样的那个经文。这2个寄送呢，每一个不管印度的那个佛教大师也好，西藏的也好，都那个写经文的时候都有这2个在那个念的前面。
觉性是什么意思？发心、决心。就是发心的动机的意思，发心吗？
对。他叫那个藏文的话，当下的话应该是决心commitment。
So then after that, we have 2 verses actually are not part of the 37 practices of Bodhisattva. The first verse, and why do we have these 2 verses? The first one is to praise Lokeshvaraya or Kuan Yin. And then the second verse is actually to write down the reason, the purpose of why is there a commitment to write such 37 practices of Bodhisattvas.
这2个不是那个南无罗格秀惹亚不算，再有2个，那个谁见诸法无来去，那个是赞叹观世音菩萨，然后再有一个句颂，这个是觉性，
利乐之源诸圆觉。So the first verse that Lama referred to, at all times I prostrate with respect for 3 doors, etc. That is the verse that praised the Lokeshvaraya. And then the second verse, the perfect Buddha's sources of benefit and happiness, etc. That talks about a commitment, why there's a commitment to write this text.
那个赞叹颂，观世音菩萨赞叹颂所以解释的话，谁见诸法无来去，那个意思呢？观世音菩萨既然他证悟到法界，一切的情况就怎么讲呢？就他证悟到这个法界的空中证悟了就对他来讲，没什么好的不好的，没什么的，都是那个就融入已经在那个法界了。但是呢，就是他一直不断的发心的那个度众生，因为那个他为什么成就法界也累积福德资粮一直信那个菩萨道的那个的时候，都是累积起来的那个慈悲心，累积慈悲心很长的时间的关系，他竟然到了那个成就了，但是那个还是一直会出现，他那个不同的转世度众生这样的。自己的那个上师也好，这样的一个观世音菩萨，要赞叹这样的观世音菩萨的意思，大概是这样，听懂吗？
So the praise, at all times I prostrate. This verse is a verse that praise the Lokeshvaraya. We know that Lokeshvaraya already actualized the nature of the mind and then have achieved the Dhammakaya. And so there's to him or to her, there's no differences where there's no coming, there's no going. There's no these two extremes. It's all remain in the nature of the mind or the emptiness. So, however, in this process, before Lokeshvaraya attained this enlightenment, there is continuous generating this wish to benefit all sentient beings, to accumulate all the merit and virtue and wisdom. So that's out of his loving kindness and compassion, all the way until attain ultimate enlightenment. And even if after he attained the enlightenment, he continued to animate many different animations in order to benefit all sentient beings. And so with that we praise Lokeshvaraya.
这个是赞叹的部分啊。那第二个句颂是平地局内周不上面啊，当记录的时候这样唱是这样子。你帮我念一下那个。利乐之源诸圆觉，从修正法而出生，彼亦依赖知其行，是故当说佛子行。所有的快乐，暂时的快乐，永久的快乐，所有的那个痛苦，暂时的痛苦和那个下上那种的痛苦，都是有原因的，都是有怎么讲啊？它的原因的呈现的，不是没有原因，自然就变成这样子的。那什么原因呢？就所有的暂时的快乐、永久快乐都是那个累积福的资料呈现的。那痛苦也是滋养就自己的业力这些产生的。所以呢，既然每个众生都是享有快乐的，没有人要痛苦的，那就我们应该要知道，怎么去累积起来这些的那个福德资料，先有认出来，然后呢认出来以后呢，怎么去做，这些需要知道的那烦恼那个业障上来讲的话，先要知道哪些是业障，那就怎么去那个消除，这些也要知道的。他是这样说，这个就是这样的。所以呢，我在这里就接下来的37个句颂来，讲一下这个信菩萨道的一个，应该有怎么样的一个经人，这个是解信。
So the second verse, the perfect Buddha, source of benefit and happiness, arises from accomplishing the sublime Dharma. And as that accomplishment depends on learning the Dharma practices, I will explain the Bodhisattva's practices. We understand that all sentient beings have the wish to pursue happiness and avoid suffering. And whether it is happiness or suffering, whether it's temporary or permanent or ultimate, there are reasons that why all sentient beings experience happiness or suffering. There's nothing that does not have a cause or reason. It all comes from accumulation, whether it's a merit, virtue, wisdom, or it is a cause for our suffering because of certain karma, certain deeds we do. So we should learn what is the source of happiness and what is the source of suffering and try to practice it. the right way. So in order to accumulate merit, virtue, and wisdom. And then so we also need to understand what is karma and how do we avoid accumulate negative karma and eliminate suffering. So that is the reason why I explain 37 practices of Bodhisattvas here. That is the meaning of this second verse.
普通来讲的话，就哪一些是恶意，哪一些是善事，都有解释了很多其他前行法的部分那些是比较普通的但这里呢，因为是这个是特的那个大乘心菩萨的一个道的一个经论，他讲的也是37个句颂的怎么讲？那个一个大乘菩萨的角度的有解释的。
So, in other scriptures, talked about virtue and non-virtue, karma, and that is a generic way of explaining this. The reason, the writing behind this 37 practices comes from the practice in the Mahayana tradition, the Bodhisattva tradition. So it talks about what we could do in our daily life, and in 37 different conditions, situation, what we could do, what we could practice, how we could hold our mind, and that's coming from Mahayana, practicing the Bodhisattva path, trying to help us generate virtue and avoid non-virtue karma.
接下来第一个句颂37颂给大家是上面的话，当觉知其和通明的等等，目前的
获得暇满大舟时，自他为渡轮迴海，昼夜恒时不懒散，闻思修是佛子行。
很清楚了，他的意思就是，我们现在有非常难的、很尊贵的一个暇满人生，这个心有认出来多那个尊贵了，要得到这样的话，有多难的，这些怎么讲呢？我们的前行法论里面，那个释迦行者前行法论就自转性法的时候，就有不同角度的解释得很清楚。那个要得到这种暇满人生的话，要怎么样的条件，有多难，这些那个部分你讲得很清楚了。不管怎么样，还是就是那个我们有知道我们有认出来，现在我们自己的那个人生是多尊贵。
The first verse. At this time when the difficult to gain ship of leisure and fortune has been obtained, ceaselessly hearing, pondering, and meditating day and night in order to liberate others and oneself from the ocean of cyclic existence is the Bodhisattva's practice. This verse talked about the fact that we have the good fortune to attain human body, and this is a lot of leisure, it's a lot of perfection. That's included by having attained this human body. This is very difficult. In the text of the Nandro, the preliminary of the Nandro, talked about four minds, four turning minds. Then it used different examples to explain from different angle to help us understand how difficult it is to gain a human body. So because it is so difficult, we should understand this is such a prestigious, such a unusual opportunity that we have this great fortune to gain this human body, and how we should treasure it.
他这几首里面用的那个怎么讲 ？example 是一个船，为什么用这个来代替我们的那个人生？因为这个轮回啊，生老病死，还有很多那个苦恼。像那个很深很深，像大海一样，很难很难就超越这个的，几乎没有办法的。为什么我们从来没有解脱过这个超越过这个苦恼的大海啊？从无始以来到现在没有解脱过。有人有解脱过的话，不会再那个推展到这个再来的。那么长时间。从来没有完成过的一件事情，有可能现在会完成的，因为要过这个大海的话，一定要有一个船嘛。那现在的这个上海人生呢，就像一个船，要过这个大海的一个船，那怎么用呢？看你自己。
So why is there use the example of ship in this verse versus just say directly our human body? We know that all sentient beings suffering from the four difficult sufferings: the birth, suffering of birth, and then again getting old, illness, and eventually death. These four different sufferings. It is very difficult to overcome. It is almost like swimming in a huge ocean. From beginner's time, we have never been relieved from these sufferings. It's like swimming or in the ocean. So if we have ever been liberated, then we will not degenerate until the place, the status we have now today. So if we want to overcome this oceans of suffering, what should we do? We have to use a boat, a ship, in order to sail across this ocean and achieve some liberation. So in this case, we use ship or boat as an example for the difficult to gain leisure of human body. How precious it is.
然后呢，就后面的呢两个verse 说的是我们应该当然每个人都不想这个在这个苦恼的那个大海上游下嘛，那有想过这个的话，先有的是。好好的那个闻思修佛法的闻思修，为什么呢？佛法里头讲得清楚怎么去那个解脱的道路哪一些是解脱道路的那个障碍，做什么样的话有怎么样的结果，这些都有那个。佛已经他已经有告诉我们了，很清楚了。我们先有学习，然后思考，然后就是那个要去修，这样做也是，就不要动机为了我自己一个人，这样做。前面动机不要。所有的众生，为了所有的众生，我们是修也是为了所有的众生，渡这个苦恼的那个大海，我这样做，要这样想，这个是第一个举措啊。信菩萨道的话，先要做的是这个。
So the second half. And as the accomplishment depends on knowing the Dharma practices, I will explain the Bodhisattva's practices. He talked about we should practice day and night with a diligent mind. And if we want to stay away from suffering, we should strive very hard to understand, to listen, to learn, and to contemplate, to think about the meaning behind this teaching, and also to practice, to meditate. And these are the paths for us that will lead us to liberation. And kind Buddha also explained in many different occasions what are some of the obstacles, what are some of the common barriers, and how do we progress in this path, how do we avoid certain things. He has explained very clearly in many different places. So we should also try to understand, to learn, to listen, to contemplate, and to meditate, to practice accordingly. And here we should always remember, as we talked about in the second verse before these 37 practices, that what is our motivation? The motivation is not just for ourselves, the realization, the happiness of ourselves, but for all the sentient beings. That is the right motivation, and that is the motivation we should have as we practice Bodhisattva path. And that is the guideline we should have in these 37 practices of Bodhisattva.
他还有提到一个字是这里，就不断要努力的意思嘛，就不是有的手禅上，然后就轻松啊，就休息，不是的。他说这里要很努力啊，很精进的要这样做。为什么呢？就前面讲了，这个相爱人生是非常难的，这样就我们现在有了很难得的一个珍贵的人生啊，那这个也是不知道会多长啊，因为就是那个无上的关系等等啊，就是那个所以要很精进的要去做的意思。今天就是讲这里去诵之礼，然后接下来所以要思考的这个部分是，人生难得啊，怎么样难得啊？是不是跟那个有时候跟其他人不一样的地方啊？就这些方面，要思考，然后就是，然后回到这里的时候，在我们讨论今天的一些话题的讨论啊，然后再讲那个下一集中。
So the second half, by the way, I read the wrong verse earlier. It's ceaselessly hearing, pondering, and meditating day and night in order to liberate others and oneself from the ocean of cyclic existence is the Bodhisattva's practice. So here we talked about diligence, that day and night practice it. And the essence here is to remind us that diligence, that it is difficult, such a rare opportunity to gain this leisure human body. And now that we have gained this human body, we also want to stay away from suffering, but we don't know how long we will be able to have this human body because of all the impermanence. And so we should grasp this opportunity and to do whatever we can diligently to practice. So this is, we will stop here for today's teaching, and then I hope that you will be able to think about it, to contemplate. It is such a difficult and rare opportunity to gain this human body. And you could also think about having this human body, why is it so difficult, and how it is so supreme, how is it different from other sentient beings. So So you could think about it, contemplate this. And if you have other questions related to this verse, then we could continue our discussion when I return. So we'll stop here, and then now we go to our regular practice in Amitabha.